Hello, welcome to Meet the Problem Solvers. I'm Judy Perlman, and tonight my guest is Sara Reid. Sara and I are here to talk about, what was the title? Advocacy. Advocacy, and at the heart of trans feminine leadership. That was not the title, but we'll go with that for now. Anyway, I've known Sara for a couple of years now. She's a strong and interesting person with an interesting story to tell, and we're really here to talk about, in our general framework of sort of problems and solutions, to talk both on sort of the individual level and also on the community level. So, Sara, we talked first, actually, you had seen an earlier show, and you talked about the isolation that came through in the conversation that I'd had about domestic violence. Is that something, does the sort of the resonance with the isolation?
Oh, certainly. I mean, I had it, in my childhood. I had it in my family life. I was married for a number of years. It certainly was a very frightening part of what should have been an affirming and supportive home.
And when you say the frightening thing was how isolated you felt?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I went into all parts of my life since I was very young, knowing who I was, but also knowing that that wasn't acceptable. So I hid.
Yeah.
And so the isolation was a self-protection.
Yeah, well, I guess that's both a double-edged sword, right? You're isolated, so you're alone, but you're also not you're not putting yourself into a place where you are at risk.
And it's very hard to get support when the looking for that support is taboo or forbidden. So it just like what my first counselor said, bad things tend to grow in the dark.
Oh,
and so
that's a great point.
Coming out, learning to tell the truth about one's life, and then meeting other folks who may be further on the journey, and building my own network of safety and community have all been part of getting me to where I am today.
That's great.
And in the work that I do.
Yeah. It's very interesting because we really want to talk and go back and forth between sort of an individual's experience, including Sara's experience, but also the way that she's worked with and helped individuals on their journey and taking the steps they wanted. But the interplay between an individual's experience and a larger community experience is something we just need to keep revisiting in this conversation, because the personal is political, and I guess for trans feminine people, the personal is very public, and you're kind of at everybody's mercy. And one of the things we were talking about in terms of sort of the problem is that not only is that the internal piece of it, but there is so much discrimination. And so could you sort of put us into that picture a little bit of where you see that? And
well, in Massachusetts, we've come a long ways. We've had community members for decades that have told their story, and it was through the telling of their story that progress was made, and our stories were able to touch hearts. There were people doing advocacy who became my role models. There were people doing it perhaps long before them, but they were at a time when they were never acknowledged, and a lot of them passed due to the AIDS epidemic. So, but I'm very glad for the people that I've had to look up to. I think it is very true that a woman is a product of her village, and a successful woman certainly is a product of her community.
I want to roll back to a word that you said that I started with, that I don't think we have in the world a shared understanding of what the word advocacy actually means. And so let's not pretend that we're going to define it for the entire universe, right here, you and me, right here. But let's just define it for our conversation. In your work as an individual and in community and in in all the settings you go to, how would you define the word advocacy? What does it mean for you?
It has been, I think the easiest way to describe where we're at, because we're kind of in the Old West of trying to establish our legitimacy and our presence in culture for real. A friend of mine always says I'm not part of the Cirque du Soleil, and I think that's very true for myself. And so the advocacy that, as I've done it and as I've had experience for me, would be like me coming alongside you and helping you with your obstacles, with maybe shortcomings that are preventing you to move forward in life, to progress, and maybe working together to face the very intimidating, the medical system, legal structures, navigating careers, and as we always do in the village, navigating relationships.
Yeah.
Because relationships on an ongoing basis are always baffling and frustrating, and it's an ongoing.
Yeah. So advocacy has a lot of levels. It also means taking data and making the data speak to legislators. I mean, there are a lot of things that I know you have done.
Well, I've also talked with medical communities about the importance of capturing data. We have had the good fortune that insurance, thanks to Governor Patrick, a couple years ago began to stop discriminating against us in gender-affirming care. But at the same time, advocacy has been educating the medical community, and we've got a long ways to go there, even though there are many now stepping forward to declare themselves as medical providers of this kind of care. There's still quite a lot to learn from the perspective of insurance and medical providers and community supporters.
So I think what you're saying partly is that, I think what I'm hearing is there may be advances on the books, and yet it's taking a while for the people who have to comply with that to catch up. Yes,
and it still remains true, and it has been true for a very long time, that the body of knowledge about transgender care, and I mean transgender in a much narrower way than in some ways it has come to me. We might want to talk about that, but the body of knowledge has rested within the community, and like in other tribes, stories get passed down from those who have had adventures, those who have had experience, those who have crossed barriers, and they get passed down to people who are just starting their journeys out. This is not well known, the kind of the secrets and some of the things one can do.
Some of the solutions that we've talked about, you have found, that others have found, that others brought you along, and you've now,
So, when you talk like in some medical settings, a lot of the trainings I've done, they just wanted us, me and the nurse I work with, to talk about pronouns and bathrooms. And, like, life is just so much beyond that. There is just so much more. I mean, that's just how you're going to use this building, and how to respectfully respect me the way I want to be respected.
Right.
But there is so much more to transgender care than that. That's just the starting point of how to not be hurtful. Basic respect.
Well, let's dive into it for a minute, because the LGBTQAI designation is a large umbrella, and it brings together people with many, many issues, some of which intersect and many which don't. And I think what you and I wanted to do tonight was really talk very specifically within the trans woman experience.
Yes.
And that
is my experience. I mean, I respect broader categories. I think in the last few years, people have there are some who have translated trans to mean whatever you want it to mean. And this can be particularly problematic. I don't have a problem with it, but it can be problematic when somebody projects that onto what I'm saying about myself.
Right.
And I am not
Right.
saying that that my existence means that anything goes. It's very, I guess it's just very specific to me. I mean that I am on the journey of womanhood and just seek to find my place in society there.
Right.
And that's my personal experience.
And you should be allowed to have the narrative about your life and about the way you present yourself and the way you are in the world to be through your lens, not through somebody else kind of insisting that they're going to use they, them pronouns to
Right.
you. That would feel as unsettling to you as it would to me or to somebody else. It's just not who you see who you are.
Sure, and
are.
and there is, I definitely support they, them. I think there are, as a transgender woman, we have to deal with a lot of misogyny. We have to deal with a lot of things that are very well known to women born into the world of women challenges. And so that's enough of a struggle and explanation right there why we would aspire to be ourselves in a world that is a man's world. So that's enough. And some of these broader conversations and other people's experiences, I believe in always respecting whatever somebody says about themselves. But when I speak transgender, I typically mean it in a narrower sense of somebody not identifying with the gender that they were born into and seeking to transition to where they belong, in my case, in the sense of a binary woman.
So this is Meet the Problem Solvers. My guest is Sara Reid. I'm Judy Perlman. As usual, we're having an interesting conversation, and hopefully it's going to bring some new light for some listeners and watchers in some areas they're not familiar with. So we talked about the word advocacy, and I would just like to define another term that is used often, which is cisgender or cis woman, and what that kind of a suffix, no, a prefix. That's a cis, it's CIS, and the older I get, I'm getting a worse lisp. I don't know what's up with that. And it basically means someone who lives in the life, it lives a life that is aligned with the gender they were born into. And so that is in kind of in comparison with a trans person.
Right. So that's a word that's like way too complicated for most daily conversations, but it does come in helpful in gender conversations and also in comparing what your journey as a woman from birth on and what my journey might have been whenever I may have said, hey, wait a minute, I'm on the wrong, this is, you know, I'm this person, and everybody says that I'm this other person. So that would be the difference, that I wouldn't have had the straightforward path and the social affirmation. I've kind of had to declare myself. In the context of that, using the word cis can be helpful. I think in broader public polite discourse, it's a little bit of baggage for people that are not on board with understanding these things, and it can sound to some like they're being called a sissy man or something. I heard an interview in Britain, and the interviewer was very bad, and the interviewee was somebody very on board with a lot of gender theory and kept saying, no, that's what you are. You're a cis man. And he says, I find that very offensive. And he's thinking SIS.
Right.
And I'm like, you know, this is just not a helpful conversation.
Right.
So
now is when we turn to solutions. So one solution, of course, is if there's a confusing conversation, if you're in a conversation that is not making sense, to try to everybody take a breath and try to chill it out and try to get back on to understand each other and to hear each other.
I love to ask questions.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Yeah. And, you know, I love to cross cultural barriers. And I recognize that that's not everybody. But, like, if you tell me you were born in another country, or you're your religious interests are a certain way, or philosophy, or medical, or meditation practices. I wanted to ask questions about
You're curious.
it. And so
Yeah.
I'm very curious.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily find things get too tense when you're on the side of being a strong ally and somebody that
Right.
really wants to know more about the other person.
with
You have to
true
be genuine.
curiosity.
You
Yes,
have to be
exactly.
genuine.
Yeah, yeah. So we talked a little bit about sort of navigating the medical part of gender affirmation. When we think about the solutions that I know you've done for other people navigating that health insurance world, tell us a little bit about what are the barriers and what does it look like to be a solution to those barriers?
The barriers have been on multiple levels. They originally, for the longest time, they've been almost complete barriers. I could talk for hours on just that, but I think where we stand now is there's still a lot of quite a bit of a learning curve on the inside of the side of insurance management and understanding about what gender affirming care is. In the medical world also, they will do what you can afford to pay for or what the insurance will cover, but it's not always appropriate. It's a one-size-fits-all. They always say life is sort of a rainbow, but insurance companies like check boxes. So you may get certain procedures that X, Y, and Z are covered, but the doctor, based on, for instance, I'm talking a lot about facial feminization, the doctor will recommend you need to get these 4, 2, 6, or 8 things that will really give you that very subtle, general impression that you are who you say you are. And so what we find, though, is when we go to the insurance company, they'll say, oh, we only, your plan only covers 4 of the 8. And so everybody gets the 4 of the 8, and I may have girlfriends that have had a different life experience. They may have won the genetic lottery, and they need perhaps something else to repair or do something that happened in their life. And that's not covered, but they will get the same 4 procedures
Cookie cutter.
yeah, it's cookie cutter. And it's a lack of understanding of what that is. So sometimes there are workarounds. There's ways of recoding. It's been still difficult to get some of the surgeons onboarding with taking insurance because they feel they should get more, or there's like this ongoing negotiation. And meanwhile, our lives are going by. It's been a lot of educating. I've worked with a lot with Boston Medical Center and just struck up a relationship and got a chance to talk with them. My primary work has been supporting the transgender health program at Boston Healthcare for the Homeless.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. So again, sort of on the solutions and the individual side, I think in a way you're selling yourself short on that, because I know what you've told me and other people have told me is that you're like a whiz in getting into those health insurance companies and spinning it or interpreting it or really getting much further than the person would have gotten on their own.
Yes, it is fair, because
fair.
I wanted to kind of give the State of the Union first, but at the same time, I've learned to get a little excited when I get the first no, because it's always no. So I say, well, okay, good, got that behind me.
Got that behind me, right.
And then my next question is, and this I teach mainly the girls. I work a lot with the girls, but also guys, the principles are the same, and that is, why no? Why no? And then I learned to reformulate the argument, remake the case, make a better case, see if there's a workaround, and make sure I'm talking to the decision maker. And I encourage folks who are approaching the medical thing or talking to their insurer. You can call insurance 8 times and get 8 different people. And I learned early on that having one person at the insurance company who is in relationship at least with the decision maker and who can kind of navigate through this, makes a good partner to make real progress with what you need.
That's great. That's great. So let's talk a little bit then about some of the other solutions that are kind of on the community level. So you just mentioned before that you've been very active at Boston Healthcare for the Homeless.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, look, we have both images going on there. That's interesting. Oh, there we go. So tell us a little bit more about that organization and what your role is there. And then I also want to talk about some of your other advocacy work. We got a lot to do here.
Okay.
Okay.
So I first got involved with Boston, folks in Boston. I knew Boston was the place where I could find a few other trans people and hopefully some support and hopefully some medical people and therapists who were well-versed in transgender care. And I found that there were some willing, but not a lot who were knowledgeable by their own admission. And that was about 20 years ago when I first came this way. And about 12 years ago, I heard that through a group that was meeting here at Cambridge Cares About AIDS called Transgender, I jumped into the gang by a couple of the girls. I met at a social outing, and then we ended up at the State House on the same day. And this lovely Puerto Rican girl, Bliss, came out and grabbed me by the arm and says, "Hey, you're with us." And it was just terrific to kind of have my village. And those girls, again, are some of the people who I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them.
That's beautiful.
And I got to know a few of the girls. I got very close to one girl, Cherelle, who has been my mentor and my sister and a role model there. So
what you do at Boston Healthcare for the Homeless?
So they told me, yes, thank you.
That's all right.
Senior moment. So they told me that there was this new clinic opening at Boston Healthcare for the Homeless for transgender people. And I said, they said, would you like to come and maybe switch your doctor, your primary care, and meet this nurse, Pam Klein, and she wants to work with trans people. And I said, wait a minute, she wants to, is she trying to like end her career? Because, you know, prior to her, it was sort of done in the shadows. There were places that saw us, but were not like shouting it from the rooftops by any measure. But she just had come from California, and like a lot of the loose nuts in America get shook down to California, I guess. So she came out and she's like, no, this is an underserved population. There are definitely a lot of trans people experience homelessness, marginalization, have difficulty getting health care, and true to the spirit of Boston Healthcare for the Homeless, their founder, their CEO, their top management says, what, we have an underserved population in Boston? Sure, let's start a program. And that's the spirit that they've always had. They've just been welcoming and supportive. And so I met Pam at that time, about 12 years ago, and she was knowledgeable, and she had some experience, and was very, very welcoming. So I jumped aboard and started doing my primary care there. And then after a while, got kind of plucked out to sit on the Consumer Advisory Board because they thought that I had some things that could be helpful.
Smart, you're wicked articulate, and you were representing a group that was a growing group.
Yeah. So, and you know, there I realized, you know, I'm also supporting the work of Boston Healthcare for the Homeless, and we're dealing with a much broader population of people who may have different fruits to the problems, but a lot of the same roots. So people just having a tough time in life. Yeah. And so I sat on the CAB for a couple years, and then they wanted me to be on the board of directors. And so I refused that first for a little while because I was way spread too thin. I was working 7 days a week at that point. And then it just came to the point where, no, this kind of makes sense, and maybe there'll be a reason for this. And as the Boston Medical Center started declared, and they had been working with community members for many years. There's a doctor that's been doing primary care for trans people for 30 years. Wow. But it was, again, under the radar. But they decided a few years ago, that there was enough of a population, enough of a need. They were seeing a number of us, and they were frankly having some complaints because the broader hospital wasn't on board with understanding the culture. So they needed to do trainings of a lot of the departments, and then some general cultural competency for the entire hospital.
And you were part of that whole thing?
I got to be part of it.
Oh, that's great.
So, and it was an important thing to do. It wasn't. It was a voluntary position, but you only get a chance to start off something really good on the right foot, like once.
Yeah. Sara, I see our time is short, and I have a couple of the takeaways that I really wanted us to get to. So, one of the most clear things you said was trans people have skills and they have interests and they need an opportunity to work in the world. Overcoming, if you're looking to hire someone and someone walks in with kind of the skills you're looking for, give them a chance.
Right.
Reach out, make it as easy for them as you can. That's one of the takeaways, is how to help. Another really important one is to acknowledge that recent progress under President Obama, and just generally in sort of a cultural shift towards more acceptance, we're now in a big knee-jerk reaction. And as you put it to me, trans people are the canaries in the coal mine.
Yes.
You're one of the earliest, fastest, easiest targets for people who are filled with fear and hate.
And that progress, like, it was said this summer that, we got left behind at Stonewall. So that progress was 50 years in the making and more, about our community pushing forward to come into the public awareness.